Pardon that first frame of a YouTube video that we're going to watch a little bit of clips from later on with pertinent information to what you're going to see on this stream. So, welcome to tonight's stream. I'm going to cover the ins and outs of the HK53 platform. I recently acquired an HK53 clone, the Century Arms / MKE AP53. And we're not going to break it down completely. I'm not going to strip it to where I'm going to be cleaning it or anything like that, even though it probably will need cleaning soon. But I'm just going to do a basic field strip, though. I'm not going to tear it down like the bolt carrier group or anything like that. I'm just going to show you the ins and outs of what you're getting if you decide to buy the pistol, and how it compares to an MP5 and an HK33, because obviously those are the two firearms to compare it to. And I'll go over a little bit about like what the firearms are about, the history and everything like that. So, without further ado, here it is. And no, despite the markings, it's not select fire or anything like that. You can get many clone manufacturers put on like these markings with the trigger housings that they come with, but this is just semi-auto only. So you got safe and then semi, and that's about it. Rather, I should say that is it. One thing that I did today before stream was I finally got my HK53 handguard delivered to me, so I was able to put that on with a little bit of fitting issues, but I was able to get it on this piece. These come with MP5 handguards, and I'll get to like the differences between the MP5 handguard and the HK53 handguard in a bit. Let me adjust the volume here. There we go. Okay. So a little bit of a story about my personal experience with the HK53 platform. I had actually never fired like an HK53 or any of the clones, and I'm going to use the term HK53 and clones kind of like interchangeably to mean the platform. This is not a real HK53, of course. This is just a clone imported by Century, made by MKE in Turkey. These have been on the market for a little bit longer than a year, I would say. Atlantic Firearms seems to be the one that's pushing these and selling them the most. I didn't get mine from Atlantic. I got mine that happened to be in stock at one of the local stores. So as soon as a friend of mine who went into that local store started looking around, and then he saw that on the wall, he's like, he let me know, hey, you gotta go look at this. I know you're in the market for an HK53. It was only like $1,400, and that's what he told me on Discord. Well, turns out I went to the store and it was a little bit higher than that, because this is the version with that comes with this like mag pull. I think it's I don't know what type of brace this is, because I'm actually not that familiar with mag pull equipment these days. But it is kind of like it's a brace that is optional that comes with some variants of the pistol if you decide to get it. My plan is to actually eventually SBR this thing. The only reason I haven't yet is, number one, I just bought it. Number two, I had to test it out to see how it shoots. And number three, the ATF has kind of released several dozen proposed rules that are open to public comment now, but are planned to go in effect over the next few months. And one of those rules is they are, I think, doing away with the engraving requirement on Form 1s if the firearm is already like manufactured and has a serial number on it from the manufacturer or the importer. The idea being that, you know, if you engrave it with your name or your trust and then your city and your state, which is what you're supposed to do, that's almost a redundant marking, and it kind of ruins the value of the gun. One of my old friends basically said, or he made kind of a joke that's somewhat true, is that when you form one, any kind of firearm, you're kind of marrying the gun, because it's really hard to get rid of once you have your name on it, even if you want to sell it through legal means, like through a Form 4 to another individual or trust, or to an FFL who can buy Form 4s can buy NFA firearms. So if they're like an 02, 07 SOT, so. But they're planning on getting rid of that requirement, and I don't feel like engraving this firearm. So if they get rid of that requirement, which supposedly will go into effect maybe in the next few days, weeks, or months, then 100% I will be filling out a Form 1 and properly, SBRing this gun. If not, I mean, keeping this as a pistol does have its advantages, and this brace isn't really half bad, but one of the reasons I got this gun was I wanted the actual look of a proper HK53, and to do that I need to get like a proper stock for this, so that means I'll have to SBR it. HK53 stocks, as I mentioned in another stream, are different from MP5 stocks, just so you know, and we'll go over the differences later in the stream, because there are reasons for that. There's a reason that they're kind of like built a little bit differently, even though on some variants of the 5.56 roller lock family and the 9mm roller family, they are interchangeable, but only if certain conditions are met. But anyway, more about the story of this gun. So I bought this. I bought it for a little bit less than $2,000 with sales tax included, and walked out the door with it as soon as about maybe 30 minutes after I saw it. I played with it a little bit. And I went ahead and I checked about half a dozen things that you need to check on these types of clones, these types of firearms, to make sure they will function well out of the box. And this specific firearm checked all the boxes. So I was 99% confident it would shoot well right out of the box. Some of the things that you need to check, well, we'll go over later in this stream, but I had been wanting an HK53 for quite a while, let's just say. It's just one of those guns that year after year I'd been thinking about getting. But what's held me back, besides the fact that I didn't feel like spending any money on new guns when I moved to Texas a few years ago, is the main thing was that I have previously had kind of bad luck with 5.56 guns out of short barrels like this. I have two AR platform rifles. One is a full-length rifle, 20-inch barrel with a rifle-length gas system, rifle buffer, fixed stock, and all that. I have another kind of what I call a lightweight build, which was the very first AR I built. It has, the 16.5-inch barrel, mid-length gas system, carbine buffer, and collapsible stock. And those length barrels are meant for 5.56. If you're shooting 5.56 out of any kind of short barrel, and I'm not an expert on this, but your mileage can vary depending on how well the gas system is tuned, what kind of ammo it's tuned for, and everything. And if you're shooting 5.56 out of short barrel, you'll probably get more reliability if you shoot suppressed. But needless to say, as I said in previous streams, I don't have any suppressors at the moment, although that might change in the future. So I was a little bit nervous about getting back into 5.56 out of short barrels like this, because I had owned a G36C clone before, and those I think have 9-inch barrels. And I mentioned in my G36 stream I could never get that gun to function like reliably and go through a whole magazine without any failures to feed or failures to eject. Usually there'd be like two or three malfunctions per magazine. And before that, I had a couple of AR pistols back around 2014, 2015, and both of those didn't function very well either. They were kind of novelties more than anything else, because I'd seen AR pistols online. I said, you know what, why don't I build a pistol? I've already built a rifle. So, but none of those firearms functioned reliably. So I was a little bit nervous about that when I was buying this gun. So I bought it. It felt really nice, But the test was the next day when I went shooting with some friends whether or not it was going to function reliably. And I am happy to say that after we went through several magazines worth, probably about, I want to say 250, maybe 300 rounds, there was not one single malfunction in this gun. Just like my HK53 clone, which is a Century C93, I've never ever had a malfunction from that firearm either. Whether it was brass case, steel case, several different brands, several different weights of bullets. I mean, this thing functioned like a champ. And I hopefully haven't jinxed myself into you know, my next range trip being like, you know, oh my God, there's going to be like malfunctions or something like that. But no, I'm very happy to report after 200, 300 rounds, no malfunctions whatsoever. And now I'm perfectly confident and really wanting to SBR this gun to make it, you know, as close to a true HK53 as possible with a proper HK53 stock. I don't know if I'm going to go with the fixed stock or the collapsible stock. I like fixed stocks on roller lock guns more than collapsible stocks for two reasons. Number one, the collapsible stocks, especially if they're HK, are overpriced. I know MKE makes collapsible stocks and they're just as good, but you can get them for like $250, $300. I still think that's a little bit high. But people are wanting like $600, $650, $700 for actual German HK53 collapsing stocks, which, you know, are cool when you actually have to, like, you're in a vehicle, you got to shoot through the windshield or something like that, I guess. But I am fine with the fixed stock because the fixed stock has a slightly longer length of pull, which I really like because I'm relatively tall, my arms are relatively long, and I typically like a longer length of pull rather than a shorter length of pull so I can get a proper sight picture. Another thing with these guns is most roller lock guns like this, I like to use the iron sights. I don't typically put optics on them. My MP5 does have an optic on it because I didn't really have any other gun to put that particular optic on, and this has a rail to mount an optic, but I'm not gonna bother with it at the moment. So I'm just very happy that this gun functioned reliably. So very happy with that. I'm gonna give you a little bit of a show or tour of this gun, and then we're gonna go over kind of like the ins and outs, its features and everything, not to like copy a certain very popular car YouTuber. But anyway, okay, so let's go ahead and do a function test here. You can see we're clear, and this is basically kind of nicknamed the thick P5, at least by Grantham and several other gun tubers, mainly because it's basically, you know, do the HK slap. It's an MP5, but in 5.56, and you really don't know that until you look closely, unless of course you take one of these magazines and then you put it in the gun. And these are like the HK33 and like the G36. These are rock and lock, but they're not rock and lock like an AK. They're more kind of like tilt and lock. So when you put the magazine in, you kind of rub it up against the front end of the magazine well, and then once it's seated like that and you can't go any further, you just rock it back like that, and you should hear it click. These work, by the way, with the German mags that I have here. But the gun actually comes with two MKE mags that I assume are built or manufactured in Turkey. These are kind of translucent mags that are very similar to the translucent mags that are kind of standard with the G36, except these are made for the HK33 and the 53. I will point out these particular mags go well with this gun, but they don't fit into my Century C93, which is my HK33 clone. So just be forewarned about that. I think it's because the magazine wells are slightly different sizes or cut to slightly different sizes, and the lip here that kind of keeps you from over inserting the magazine is slightly of different spec on this than on an actual German magazine. And so these kind of fit flush with the gun without moving. You notice that the German magazine actually fit in, but there was a little bit of wobble. So that clicked into place. There's no wobble when you use this particular magazine though. So another major difference that will go from kind of, I guess, tip to butt is that this gun comes with a standard like HK 4-prong flash hider here. This is very similar to the flash hider that comes on the G36 C-length variant. I think the K-length variant also has this flash hider, but don't quote me on that. So it's a 4-prong rather than a bird cage. And yes, there are, I believe, 1/2x28 threads underneath this flash hider. So if you wanted to twist it off and you wanted to run a suppressor, you could. There are certain people in the gun community that have done reviews on this, and they give you a little bit of a warning about using a suppressor on this, because I don't think this has a proper shoulder with those threads. So you could risk a baffle strike if you're not careful with running this suppressed. But I haven't really heard of any problems of anybody running these suppressed and having, like, you know, their suppressors being damaged or destroyed from doing that. But they do give you that option. So there is threading underneath for a suppressor if you do want to run a can on this. The sights are basically the same as HK sights. You have kind of a front side post here, and then you have the diopter here for different shooting distances and different apertures and everything. They give you this, I don't really want to call it a claw mount, but this is kind of like a Picatinny rail, unlike my MP5 clone by PTR, where the Picatinny rail was like welded on the top of this receiver. This one isn't welded. It's kind of gripped onto the receiver by these 4 Allen screws that you see here. And I haven't bothered to mount an optic on it. And obviously, because I took it to the range and didn't bother to check the tightness, it's worked itself just slightly loose, but I can just tighten those Allen keys down again. But this is actually a good option if you want to put a mount on it. I don't know how well this will hold 0 or anything like that, but again, on these types of guns, I typically don't run optics. I typically rely on the iron sights. And even with this Picatinny rail on it, I do get a good side picture from this diopter sight through this front side post here. So this, at least for me, doesn't affect the sight picture. Let's see. Okay, so I want to talk about the handguard. I ordered this handguard from Gatewood Supply. I have their business card here if you want to see it. They are, I don't know really the people who run this outfit, but that's their business card. They are based in Trussville, Alabama. So if you want to support the local economy there, in Alabama and the Birmingham area, you certainly can do that. One of my favorite gun stores that I used to go to when I lived in Alabama was in Trussville. It was called Birmingham Pistol Wholesale. Not that I'm plugging them or anything, but they got a huge selection of everything. And when I was living in Alabama, if there was something that I couldn't find and in person, I would just go to their gun broker account and see if they had something interesting that was listed, and I would go down there and pick it up. So I gave them a lot of my business back in the day when I lived in Alabama. But I don't know that Gatewood Supply is affiliated with them because the address is different. But you know, when two gun companies are kind of like in the same town, you do wonder if they really know each other and what kind of relationship there is between them. But you know, they shipped my part out pretty fast when it was in stock. And it got here within, you know, a couple of business days. So kudos to them. If you need a lot of spare HK parts and something is out of stock at like hkparts.net, this is like these are the number 2 guys I would go to. I know there are a few other people in the market for like HK pattern guns and parts associated with them, because parts can be, you know, the market's kind of really weird. And you know what I'm talking about if you're into HK firearms. So, but yeah, I definitely recommend these guys. Anyway, back to the handguard. So this Century MKE AP53 originally comes with an MP5 length handguard, not an HK53 length handguard. I'm going to explain the difference. Previous HK53 clones like the Century C93 pistol, which Century did import some of those and like re-weld the receivers, I think, and then put in German and US made. No, it wasn't German. I think it was Malaysian and US made parts in it. Those came with MP5 handguards. Most HK53 clones that have entered the market in the US in the past 15 years have mistakenly come with MP5 handguards because MP5 handguards do fit on this gun, but they aren't what I would call proper. You can use them, but HK53 handguards are actually a slightly different length than MP5 handguards. So let me show you what I'm talking about. This is the HK53 handguard that came off this pistol. Okay, we're gonna compare the lengths here. Notice how the MP5 handguard is shorter. It's because the barrel is slightly shorter on an MP5, but more importantly, with the size of the 5.56 cartridge, the HK53 has a much larger trunnion. And when you put this MP5 handguard on here, part of the trunnion is actually exposed. So you can tell, if you can imagine this MP5 handguard still being on here, the trunnion's exposed for about ½ an inch in front of the magazine well. I just think it looks kind of tacky and ugly that way versus, you know, an actual HK53 handguard, which accounts for that extra length and gives you a little bit more material here to completely cover the trunnion. And it sits flush. And I like that much better than the MP5 handguard. So that was the first cosmetic change I was definitely going to do once I confirmed that the gun was actually going to work properly. This was, I forget how much I paid for this, but these are pretty reasonably priced. This is actually a US made version of the HK53 handguard. I am not, like I said, I'm not big on absolutely having to have German or HK OEM parts. I'm fine with going to the aftermarket, and I think the company is called BPP, who made these handguards, and they're pretty good. It felt comfortable in my hand. What I will say, though, on this particular handguard, and it might be because of the gun itself, because Steve MP5, along with Dakota Tactical, did a review on fitting handguards and HK53 parts onto the Century AP53, and some of the differences that they found and had, and some of the kind of QC issues that may have come up in certain batches. Mine doesn't really have that many of those issues, but I will say this about this handguard. As I mentioned on X earlier today, it did take some filing and some fitting to actually properly align the pushpin hole with the hole that is on the, I don't know what you call this thing, but basically it's where the pushpin goes through on the cocking handle or the cocking lever tube. So the way you insert the handguard is you kind of have to go in from inserting this part first and then adjusting it and then kind of tilting this up to where the push pin will go through. It's the same on the MP5. This was a little bit of a pain to get in because of all the fitting that had to be done, so I'm not going to take it back off in the risk that I might not be able to get it back on without embarrassing myself. So, but that's what it looks like with a proper HK53 handguard, and if you get one of these, I recommend that you get a proper HK53 length handguard instead of sticking with the MP5 handguard. It's definitely worth the extra $50, $60. Okay, moving on. The biggest way to tell, besides the magazine well, that this is an HK53 instead of an MP5 is the charging handle here. It's different. With an HK53, you've got a G3 style charging handle instead of an MP5 style charging handle. And this involves kind of like a two-step process for actually charging the weapon and then locking the bolt back. So what you have to do here is you actually have to pull out this handle just a little bit. And then it kind of has like a detent here where it locks into place here. And then you're going to pull it back from this position and then lock it into the locking latch within the charging handle or the cocking lever tube. And so it pulls back like this. There's obviously more spring resistance in this gun than there is in an MP5 because we're talking about 5.56 rather than 9mm. But you can tell like the charging handle is different versus the MP5. It's a G3 style charging handle. I don't know if it's the exact same charging handle, but it's more akin to that than it is the MP5. So we're gonna let this go home. Moving on, I already talked about the Picatinny rail as well as this diopter sight. We'll talk about the trigger housing. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this trigger housing is marked for single shot, burst, and I guess full auto, but this is not a full auto gun or even a burst fire gun. This is just safe and semi. So a lot of HK clones and manufacturers will use like fully marked lower or trigger housings just for style or for design, and people like those. But I kind of think this is a little bit more bright than I would want it to be, because I think the red that HK actually uses to mark their trigger housings is a little bit more subdued, maybe even closer to kind of like a maroon color rather than this kind of bright lipstick red. That's more of a nitpick than anything else. I'm not gonna dock it too many points because of that. The safety selector is ambidextrous. You can do it from both sides. It functions reasonably well. Maybe it's a little bit stiff at first because it's a relatively new gun, but it'll work its way and kind of wear itself in. You do have, okay, let's talk about the rear, since that's pretty much the last thing that's left on this gun besides taking it apart and pulling out the bolt carrier group. Like I said, this is a Magpul. I don't remember what style brace it is. It's like a BTR or something like that brace. I don't remember because I didn't really look at it carefully. This gun from the factory comes with an end cap, which I have here actually. I can show it to you. This is the original end cap that kind of came with the gun. And whoever the distributor was, what they do when they add these braces to it is they take off this end cap and then they put on like a new end cap that has like an AR style nut here, so you can actually put on like an AR-15 buffer tube and whatever brace stock or whatever device that you want on the back here, whatever will fit on an AR buffer tube. I personally think it's fine just for, you know, if you want to keep it as a pistol. But if you want to turn it into a proper SBR, I think it's kind of pointless to stick with this setup and get some kind of like AR-15 style stock. If you want to actually SBR it and put a stock on it, go with the proper like HK pattern stock, either an HK53 stock or one that's collapsible. There are differences, by the way, between the MP5 and the HK53 stocks. We'll get into that in just a little bit. Let me see if I can go ahead and take this apart. I'm going to show you the insides. Oh, by the way, before I do that, this does come with, I think, sling attachments. One right here. And then, of course, there's one up in front of the handguard right here. So this breaks down just like in like a regular MP5. There are push pins. These are really, really stiff from the factory because I haven't broken them in yet. So rather than be a fool about it, I'm just gonna use a tool to assist. Here is the one for the magazine well, or the trigger housing. And then there's one that's a little bit more of a pain to get out. It's for the stock. I think I'm going to need a punch. There we go. It's coming out. So one thing about the HK53 versus the MP5 that I would like to point out, and this is before I take the gun apart, there's actually, when you take out the rear push pin, a lot of spring tension here because we're dealing with 5.56 rather than 9mm. And so I had to get a little bit of assistance to get that out. But then, okay, so you take out this push pin here. This one's actually a push pin lower versus a shelf lower. So what we'll do then is we will first remove the brace and the end cap here. There is your end cap and your brace and your recoil spring in assembly. And then just like the UMP and the MP5, you can basically karate chop this trigger housing off here. This is just a standard, I think, HK roller lock trigger. I wouldn't say there's anything special about it. It's a typical HK trigger. So they're kind of a little bit spongy from the factory. So locks back into place like that. I can test dry firing it, I guess, but hold on, it's not safe. There. We'll put it back on safe for now. That's what it looks like. You can tell from my hands, like I said, it needs a little bit of cleaning. And so the next thing I want to talk about, because this is a little bit of a difference between the way these clones were built versus actual HK53s from the factory and HK33s. Next thing I have to do is I can get the bolt assembly out. You have to pull back on the charging handle just a bit, and then this is your bolt carrier group. And I got my pants and hoodie incredibly dirty. I probably shouldn't have worn white, but that's okay. This is what the inside of the receiver looks like. It's pretty oily and caked in carbon from the last range trip I had. I'm not going to break it down any further than this, but we'll go over some of these quirks and features. So this is what your bolt carrier group looks like. This is your bolt. I'm not actually going to take the bolt assembly out because on the HK53, you saw how many tries it took to get my MP5 bolt assembly back in. The HK53 is even trickier, and I'm not going to risk spending an hour trying to figure it out when I do this on stream. So, but this is much, as you can see, this is much chunkier than an MP5 bolt carrier group, obviously. One thing I want to point out is that on most HK53s that I've seen, this recoil assembly that you see here is the recoil spring and assembly, and the recoil spring, the guide rod, are not integrated with the end cap or the brace or the stock or whatever is on the rear of the gun here. Here they are. Now, it's not the end of the world. If you want to do an SBR, you can just basically take off this face of the end cap back here and just put in like the middle section of the stock and a butt plate, and you're good to go. You won't. What I will probably do though when I SBR this is I am going to get a proper HK53 recoil spring assembly. That's going to be this length, and it's not going to be captive to this end cap here. I'll get a completely separate piece and separate stock assembly, and that will give me a lot more options. But this kind of setting where the recoil spring assembly is integrated with the end cap or the stock or the brace is much more typical of a G3 than it is a HK33 family or an MP5. I don't know why MKE decided to do this that way. Maybe they had the tooling for the G3 and it was easier to just go with those dimensions when they did their HK53 clones rather than do, you know, HK53 parts from scratch. I really don't know. And we'll watch a little YouTube video from 9-Hole Reviews about that where they go over why they did this, or speculation about why they did this versus a completely uncaptive recoil spring and assembly. So I just thought that was kind of curious. Let's see, what else is here? So there's something else I want to point out, and I'm going to have to bring out my MP5 to show you. This will take me just a minute. This is a proper MP5 stock. We're going to lay that aside for now, though. With the MP5, they made, or this PTR MP5 clone, you can tell the recoil spring's a little bit different. It's captive with the bolt carrier rather than the end piece. It's not a free-floating kind of assembly. But just to illustrate, this is basically your difference between an HK53 bolt and an MP5 bolt. The HK53 bolt is on the left, the MP5 bolt is on the right, or the bolt assembly. You can see there's quite a few differences. We're talking about 5.56 versus 9mm. So yeah, just in case you wanted to know. going to put my MP5 back together though, because that's the only reason I brought it out and why I wanted to show you. What's it getting caught on? Oh, I bet I know what it's getting caught on. Durr. Had to take the trigger housing off. There we go. That's more like it. Set that aside. The other thing I want to compare this firearm to is my C93, which is an HK53 clone. And so, make sure I don't lose my pins there. I'm going to attempt to break that down too. This is my C93, which is imported by Century, I think back in the late 2000s, early 2010s. It is a full-length rifle, birdcage flash hider, and everything. This weapon's obviously a little bit more worn in. So I can see we're clear. I think this is on really tight. I'm gonna have to get a tool. So I will be right back. That didn't last long. I was like right at the end. I actually was able to get the stock off. Okay, so one thing you'll notice about the HK33 versus the HK53 is that this is kind of like the MP5, where the recoil assembly is captive with the bolt instead of the end cap, as you can see here. The other thing is, and I want to point out, and 9-hole reviews will point this out later, is the length of the recoil assemblies on the 33 and the 53 are different. The 33 is down at the bottom, the 53 is up at the top. So if you were wondering whether you can use a 33 recoil assembly on a 53 and vice versa, the answer is no, they're different. The other thing to note, I don't know about like the bolt assemblies themselves, because they appear to be the same. This is absolutely filthy, but it still runs like a champ. But this definitely needs cleaning. They look a little bit different, the bolt assemblies, but the carriers, by the way, are different between the 33 and the 53. The 33 is in my left hand, the 53 is in my right. The 53 bolt carrier is longer. Excuse me, the 53 bolt carrier is shorter than the 33. So to answer your question, whether you can use a 53 bolt carrier group in a 33 and vice versa, the answer is no as well. So they are different. It's not like the AR platform where you can use pretty much the same bolt carrier groups and everything. You just need to adjust, you know, your tuning on the gas or whatever. So no, HKs are a little bit different even within the same caliber family between the 33 and the 53. So not to confuse these, we'll keep the ones on each part a little bit separate from each other so I don't put the wrong parts on what. But I just wanted to show that, point that out. Another thing, last comparison. The trigger housings are pretty much the same or similar, I guess. For the 33 and the 53, this trigger housing appears to be a little bit more, I don't know. Maybe they're different, maybe they're compatible, but don't quote me that. I'm not that much of an expert on these, so. All right, I'm going to put my 33 back together. And my 33 is back together. Now we'll put the 53 back together. The bolt slides right in. We'll put in the trigger housing. Trigger housing push pin goes in like that. The recoil assembly, if I can align it properly. Here we go. There we go. And then all we do here, push in a little bit. And she's back together. So overall, I'm fairly impressed with the build quality of the gun. She ran 200, 300 rounds without issue at the first range trip, so very happy about that. I wouldn't overpay for these, but if you can find them at a good deal, Atlantic Firearms does run sales on these every now and then. Get them when they're on sale, I guess, or whoever's selling them, and then you're pretty much good to go. If you want a if you want a 5.56 MP5, this is pretty much it. So, like I said, once the new ATF rules are finalized regarding engraving, that's when I'll probably SBR this gun. The process is relatively easy even compared to a few years ago. I think I can just upload my fingerprints online and go through the Form 1 process completely online now rather than mail fingerprints in. So one thing I want to do, I guess, we're approaching the end of this, I want to go ahead and show you 9-hole reviews review of this particular piece versus an actual HK53. So let's put on YouTube here, and we'll go ahead and play this.
This video is brought to you by Midway USA. Support the channel by choosing Midway for your shooting and outdoor supplies.
Very pleasant. That's actually surprisingly pleasant to shoot. So this is the HK53. This is a true German, but a lot of people recently have been pinging me, despite the fact that I don't do a lot of actual product review. They were wondering what about the AP, the Arse Penetrator 53, AP53 from MKE that Century recently imported. Now, first of all, clear distinction, that is a factory-built HK53 clone. I don't know if MKE had the full TDP, the full blueprints to make the 53, which is a shortened version of the HK33. However, Turkey most certainly has the blueprints to make the HK33, and that is an active service weapon for the Turkish Armed Forces. So, a lot of people, when they pick up the AP53, they want to make something sort of like this. But there were some quirks about the AP53, and today I thought I had the stuff here, I'll make a quick video to show everybody. So, this is what you get in the box. You get the firearm itself, and you'll see, just by looking at it, this seems to be very, very similar. Obviously, the receiver is the same as the HK33. The stock is almost the same. The stock, if you just looked at it, this is going to be one of the screwy looking parts. So this is an HK33 stock. By just looking at it, it almost looks exactly the same. But, and by the way, this is a session where I just tear this down, shoot a couple rounds to show you what it is, and here we go. Now I shall use the range vise, which is my tummy. I don't know if this would work. That's very pleasant. That's actually surprisingly pleasant to shoot. Okay, so off the bat,
And this is where we kind of like get into the meat of, you know, if you actually want to SBR the AP53 pistol, what your options are because of the captive recoil spring assembly within the end cap.
Let's talk about the stocks, because I know this particular stock arrangement that MKE brought in the country has been a point of debate for many people who are unfamiliar with the HK33 system. Rightfully so, that is one of the least common systems of the HK roller delayed family of rifles. And so when you looked at this, a lot of people saw it looks like an end cap with a fused recoil spring, which is actually highly irregular for HK33 systems, because HK33 systems typically do not have a recoil rod attached to the end like the G3s would. So the G3s typically had the recoil rod attached to it, and the HK33s and MP5s had detachable recoil rods. So let's take an MP5 stock here. You pull it out, you'll see that the recoil rod is separate. Now, what adds a complexity to this is an HK53 recoil rod length. 53s and 33s have different lengths. 33s are slightly longer. The reason for that is because...
And so that's exactly what I was showing you just a few minutes ago about the differences. So they're not interchangeable. I was thinking they were until I did a little bit more research before I decided to buy this. So go me. Always do your research if you think you're wanting to do something with a firearm but are not sure. Because chances are somebody's done it before you, and you'll save yourself a lot of heartache, headache, and money.
33s are slightly longer. The reason for that is because the 33s have a slightly longer front section to their carriers. So there's two things that are mainly different on the internals between the 53s and 33s, which would be the carrier and the recoil rod. Now, I'm not sure the exact reasoning behind this, why MKE did this, but this is not the end of the world. And frankly, you can use this to adopt a brace anyways, because all you do is unscrew the two screws on the inside, and you can screw on whatever arrangement you want onto the back. However, I will not do that because I have extra stock caps, and all I will do for...
Silly YouTube rules. I was able to figure it out though.
The AP5 is I will get the recoil rod assembly. It's ready in the mail. Replace it into the AP53, and that's it.
And that's probably what I'll do. I'll just order the separate recoil rod and then the stock whenever I get around to SBRing this.
Will function as an HK53 at that point, because then it gives me maximum flexibility to switch between stocks.
So you can see this is after you Dremel and remove the back section. You want to bevel the back to look like that, so it will fit inside of the angled or the beveled hole or the cup.
Now, one thing, buffers. Early HK33s had a buffer system that was built into the carrier, meaning they could switch between stocks, and they used MP5 stocks as fixed stocks back then as well, that did not have buffers inside of them, and the buffer was then on the actual carrier itself.
So this is actually a great pausing point. My HK33 clone, that C93, is pretty much the same way. The buffer is built into the carrier. Because when Century sold these rifles in the United States, they put MP5 stocks on them instead of proper HK33 stocks. One of the differences internally between HK33 stocks is that they have provisions for buffers to be in the stock rather than in the carrier. And so because they were in the carrier, they could get away with MP5 stocks. Needless to say, I put a proper HK33 stock on mine, just for the looks.
Carrier would interact with the stock,
and it would buffer itself. Now, later on, H&K switched the buffer onto the stock cap of the HK33 and 53s. So then the carrier became bufferless. So the little tab coming out of it did not interact with it. So you need to make sure that you're getting the correct stocks that have a buffer inside of it. The MP5 has a buffer, but is a 9mm buffer. You can see it's a rubber, it's a piece of rubber. That's all it is, neoprene. Whereas the actual H&K system or the rifle systems have real buffer systems in it. What it is, it's actually a really heavy gauge spring with a plunger in front of it to slow down the speed of the carrier. Now, one curiosity of this that we had before was that this really resembled the HK91 G3 stock. I, for a while, thought that they were interchangeable, and I, for a while, thought that they had lopped off the front pins on the G3 stock. Clearly, they did not. And clearly, this is an HK33 stock cap, thanks to guys on Instagram who I was talking to, namely MP5 Jesus. But the big thing is, understand that this arrangement that the AP53 comes with is not the end of the world. You can put a stock, you can put a brace on this if this is all you have. However, the best course of action, of course, is to get an actual HK53/33 style stock and a detachable recoil rod so you can have more of a flexibility. That's how the system was intended to be working. And so that's the best case scenario if you could swing it. Worst case, this is not bad to just put a $30 stock body onto and it would still work. You could put a $300 spur stock onto it and be pretty fancy. But at that point, you may as well have gotten an actual HK33 stock cap and recoil rod. So, all in all, the recoil system is a non-issue. People who say it's an issue don't fully understand the HK system itself. So the trigger housing on the MKE, if you did not know what you were looking at, seems legit. But if you were to compare it to an actual H&K, quickly you'll see the difference. And frankly, for people who shoot these things more often, it may seem like the Ambi, but it is internally, I mean, it seems to resemble the Ambi quite well. But the external shelf is clearly, this is clearly an MKE shelf. It looks different from the actual H&K to H&K people. It also doesn't have the same texture as an H&K. I'd say it's 80% there. I mean, even if you don't redo the texture, because I know that would be a complete mold change, I would use a different coloring on this. However, these are probably military contract housings because they look exactly like the military contract T43 and T50s. I think that's what it is. I think it's just taking the military contract housing and putting it on.
Is a front pin lower, different from what you would see on the... This is a civilian spec HK, so even though it has a pin on the front, that is a false pin. It's what they call clipped and pinned. You see it just fell out.
I love when shit like that happens.
H&K shelf that blocks the full auto function, and the pin is not a real pin. So that's a clipped in pin. That's a clipped in pin lower on the H&Ks, whereas the Turks, as they did with the MP5 clones, are full pinned lowers. That is cool because you don't have to spend more money in buying a clipped in pin lower. Now, the Ambi pack looks like an Ambi pack. I haven't shot it yet. I just dry fired this at home. Small things. The red on this
at home. I don't know if he's just... I know that's his shtick. Is he's just trying to fake a British accent or something?
is not H&K red. I don't know. It looked like they used their girlfriend's nail polish to do this.
Yeah, I was commenting about the same thing. That red is just too bright. Maybe I'll just get worn in over time.
This one, tone it down if you could. If not, I don't really care. Just get an H&K housing, I guess. The texture of this housing is a little off too. If you handle enough H&Ks, it doesn't feel like an H&K housing. It looks like it from afar away. If someone doesn't know what they're looking at, it certainly looks like an H&K ambi lower, but it doesn't feel like one to someone who handles these things quite a bit more. In the back, you'll see right here, they've welded in or the ATF drove this probably. They've welded in a block. Now this is a semi-auto block. You can see that it has a cut on the back to where the full auto sear trip is no longer existing. You compare this to the full auto HK53 back and you'll see that this is the notch where the full auto sear usually trips, and it's got it cut off. Now what they did is they put a little piece of metal right there to block off the path if you had a full auto sear trip. Again, this is a full auto bulk carrier. If you put this in, it will not go through. The German ones are standard G3 HK33 thread spec, which is M15 by 1, metric 15 by 1, whereas this one, they put half 28 threads in there. However, before you get excited that this thing, can be your new suppressor hose, at least these very first iterations, they decided to machine these things. Yes, they gave it half 28 threads, but they did not give it any shoulder. Which means if you do put a suppressor, or if you do put a muzzle device on this, you most certainly want to use.
That's what I was talking about. I'm not an expert on that, but he isn't the only person that pointed out there not being a shoulder on that. So you might get a baffle strike if it doesn't thread in all the way, I think.
An alignment rod to double check that. Guys from the AK world, you are very familiar with this problem. Well, not this particular problem, but the problem of needing to align suppressors. That's disappointing. So if Sentry, if anyone at MKE is listening, don't do that. Don't do that, especially on a shorty like this. This is something that you could probably run a flow-through can, no issue. Now I'm going to test it with my flow-through can, because earlier when I put a 30 cal can on top of the 5.56 flash hider, it seemed to have plenty of clearance around. So I shall use this channel to potentially sacrifice my suppressor to see if it works. I think it should work, but I don't know. So let me do this. Let me throw the half 28 suppressor, the muzzle device on. Okay, so it looks like we're good. I don't have a stock, unfortunately, because I have not, again, for foreign people out there, for us to put a stock on short barrel rifles, you must file an ATF Form 1 and have it approved. This is not approved on the Form 1. It is currently rated, it is currently, as far as the ATF is concerned, this is a pistol.
Good old U.S. gun laws. Silly. That's what I'm going to have to do with my my AP53 if I want to turn it into an SBR and put a proper stock on it, which, like I said, 99% chance I'll do it. I'm just kind of waiting for the engravement requirement to go away.
I will Form 1 this down the road if this works as it's intended.
And I think their Form 1s are coming back in about 2 or 3 weeks at the moment, like they have been for the past few years.
You are now in the presence of a...
Oh, yeah. Okay, so here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to put all this tactical shit on it, obviously, at least not immediately, because there's a reason I bought the 53 handguard. But he did put on the collapsible stock. Like I said, these kind of tend to have issues later on where these forks that go in the indentions along the receiver tend to weaken over time. So that's why I kind of prefer having, you know, an actual fixed stock, and that's probably still what I'll go with. but we'll see. I might change my mind. Who knows? It looks like he has proper. Well, I don't know that these are German mags. I do have German mags as well as metal Malaysian mags, and I think these look better than the translucent MKE Turkish ones. That's a sick setup, though. Really, if you wanted to be tactical, I mean, like that's not bad. It looks like he's got a streamlight of some sort here. EOTech. Did he? Yeah, this is that kind of claw mount thing or whatever with the Allen keys that comes with the gun. So he's using that too. And it looks like he changed it to, he changed the trigger housing to one of the old style HKs rather than the one that came with the AP53. I like it, but I'm not picky enough to do that.
Now I shall use the range vise, which is my tummy, and the bench. There we go. Okay. I have a few 20 round magazines. Now these are 25 round magazines. That actually brings up one last point that's interesting. The Turkish magazines that they include, these are military magazines.
This is funny, by the way.
They have a very peculiar marking for helicopter and aeroplane. I'm not particularly certain how they are intending to use these things, because when you have it in, I don't know, like, do you just kind of gangster lean it?
And notice by the way, his didn't actually click into place. I have the same problem. I can't use the Turkish mags on my my C93. They only work in the AP53. They don't seat properly otherwise.
And aim it at the aeroplane. Look, planes fly at different altitudes and different airspeeds. I don't know if this is a sick joke or not. And helicopters and planes can also fly at the same altitude and airspeed. So, whatever.
I'll show you that up close after this.
See if this thing works. So do I. So let's be on this journey together. I'll check the cameras real quick. Right. All right. I'll take this lovely lady. I'll put her down here. We'll see how this one goes. Now I don't have a stock, right? I don't know if this would work. Oh my. We are ghetto. Let's see if it will work. Nah, have to do this. Alright, there we go. Actually, it's very soft shooting. That's very pleasant. That's actually surprisingly pleasant to shoot. Okay. I suppose let's see. Moment of truth, if this actually works. Nice. Nice.
Chad, I think I want a can. Yeah, I think I want some cans now.
Good so far. I should check my suppressor front to see if... No blown end caps! Ha! Now, again, I cannot suggest that to everybody. I am deliberately using an overboard suppressor and a flow-through can to mitigate some of the downsides of shooting roller delayeds with these things, and the lack of the shoulder and the interaction between the muzzle device and the barrel. The muzzle device is not on super straight, but I did use an alignment rod to check if it works with this this particular suppressor, and it does.
I can't justify it either, but at least they got rid of the $200. It's zero now, even if you still have to go through the process.
So, noob move there, sorry.
He's not even looking at the sights. He's shooting into the ground.
You guys don't see it, but that's quite the brass rainbow coming out the front. Look, 80 rounds down the barrel so far. This shoots identical to my HK53. Special thanks to the guys. Oh.
Yeah, it do be like that.
It's hot. It's very hot in the front. Special thanks to our friends at Atlantic. Yes, I did buy this. Yes, they also helped push this out to us at a breakneck speed to make sure that we had something to sort of tell people what this thing really is on the evaluation side. In conclusion, one, what I'm excited about, we have a pretty well-functioning, presumably, HK53 on the market. I am able to use a flow-through can to suppress this. No baffle strikes or no end cap strikes. That's promising. Very soft shooting. However, a point of concerns or things that they could improve upon, it would help if you did not do things like not machine the shoulder into the front. That I realize is not a concern for the military rifles, but for the US consumer, that very much is a concern for especially people who are into NFA stuff. They probably have a suppressor that they like to use, especially on an 8-inch barrel. A suppressor is a very nice thing to run with an 8-inch barrel. So all in all, man, flow-through cans were not around when these things were first fielded, so these have previously had a very poor reputation of being suppressed. But if this is it, this is a sweet shooter. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, again, thanks to Atlantic Arms, thanks to my friend, be the last. I'm curious.
I'd probably
now. One point to add to this.
I'd probably have to get a 30 cal can for that, though. I'm not an expert on suppressors and what attachments you need. I do know I want to get a suppressor for my UMP now after shooting a friend's can, because he was at the range with me. It's like, okay, I understand the appeal now, but it wasn't a flow through, and oh my god, the amount of like smoke and dust and all this shit flying back at my face. I'm surprised I didn't have like any kind of eye irritation or everything, but I had to take a break every 10 rounds because it was like, you know.
I forgot to talk about this. With my HK53, the 15x1 threads, it doesn't really have a shoulder to begin with, so I'm never going to suppress that thing. It's just not a great idea. I guess to me, yes, you could say that the flash hider looks a little bit different, but if I'm going at this at a baseline of I would never suppress that thing anyways, but this actually has an option to suppress, yeah, I am excited to see this as an HK53 owner. Now that one over there is also a true German, and I would like to preserve the actual German rifle a little more. Who knows how long these Turks would come in either, but right now I'm excited to get to enjoy something that I never thought would come into the country. Now, just to add and kind of round this out a little bit, I forgot about this, it does come with an optic mount, so it's just the traditional pick rail that goes on top. comes with a 3-point sling, something that I welcome. Not everyone does. And
Yeah, mine came with that as well, and everything that he's got, and it even comes with this hard lining case right here with the eggshells inside.
a cleaning kit actually has oil in it. So there you go. We'll see you guys on the range.
All right. Anyway, back to the gun. Just an overall summary. This is definitely the most fun gun I've purchased in definitely the past few years. I love this thing. I'm almost surely going to SBR it, and this is something that I'm going to take to the range almost every single time. Definitely have to clean it more often because it is roller delayed blowback, but you know, that's just the way the game is when you're talking about, you know, an MP5 or you know, what have you. So but yeah, these are definitely worth your time. Like I said, the main things I would do is I would make sure get an HK53 handguard. That's the first mod you should do rather than the MP5 handguard. And then the other thing is, really, there's nothing else you need to change. Just make sure some of the points that you need to check for QC quality control from the factory that I wanted to point out and that I said I was going to point out earlier in the video is that, and this is the main thing you need to do to make sure that it will function without failures. When you get any roller lock gun from the factory like this, make sure that when the bolt is seated all the way, that when you pull the charging handle out, there's actually some play back and forth in the cocking tube. And the reason there needs to be some play in the cocking tube is that there needs to be just a very small amount of space between the end of the cocking tube, which will push the bolt back, and the actual carrier itself, because otherwise, or where the bolt face sits, because otherwise you're not going to get the bolt seated in here properly, and that causes head spacing issues. So just want y'all to avoid that if you ever get one of these. So until next time, say hi to Jamez for me.